It be seconded, and I call the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I second the motion, and it's a chance for the government. It's a chance for the government to actually acknowledge they've made a mistake with the code. This disallowance motion will actually help the government live up to their rhetoric of supporting Australian jobs and supporting the growth of good, secure, well-paying jobs in this country. Labor stood firmly against the Liberal government's anti-worker ABCC legislation and the accompanying building code. This particular focus of the government, these new rules that they've brought, or old rules that they've brought back, is a draconian regime that says that any company that wishes to express interest for tendering for work for Commonwealth building work must comply with the building code. Within this code, and also noted too that it's from August, so we're talking a couple of months away, two sections of the code go after and attack Australian jobs. They undermine apprentices, they undermine Australian jobs, and these are Section 11.3a and Section 11.3c. And they're the two parts we seek this place to disallow today. Section 11.3a prohibits enterprise agreements from having clauses which prescribe the number of employees or subcontractors that may be engaged or employed on a particular site. So this is what is happening right now. This is a clause which employees and employers sit down and agree how many subcontractors may or may not work on a site. And this government wants to stop that conversation from happening and wants to stop that from being in an agreement. Section 11.3c prohibits an agreement having ratios or clauses around apprenticeships. It basically says that clauses about employees based upon which they are lawfully entitled to work in Australia. So where we have agreements which talk about apprenticeships, where we have agreements which talk about limiting the use of 457 visas, where we have agreements that talk about limiting the use of subcontractors and therefore prioritising locals for these jobs, Australians for these jobs, directly employed for these jobs, this government now say if that agreement is reached, if it is in an agreement, that company can now not tender for federal government work. These laws too, this particular part of the code, like the whole code, must apply by August, meaning, as we've seen in media reports, about 3,000 agreements need to be renegotiated by August if these companies want to tender for Commonwealth work. Now, there aren't enough days to be able to do that for the Fair Work Commission to be able to meet, even if they could get agreement, even if the employees and the employers could reach agreement, there aren't enough days between now and August for the Fair Work to consider all of those agreements, 3,000 of them. So they know that they've brought on this code and brought it forward, knowing full well it's impractical and impossible for that to occur. And let's just talk about why. Why is it the government is so fixated on these particular parts of the code, and why will they not stand with Labor? As the previous member has said, they are blinded by their pure hatred of unions. In their being blinded by their pure hatred of unions, have actually damage and will slow things down that will create chaos in the construction industry. Now, we heard during the suspension motion the Minister for Immigration say that there are dozens of currently union officials that are facing criminal offences. That is wrong. It is wrong. In this country, if you enter a workplace, if you're a union official and you haven't given notification, it's not a criminal offence. If two union officials have a cup of tea, it is not a criminal offence. Equally, it is not a criminal offence if an employer knowingly breaches their occupational health and safety, leads to a death on a workplace. In this country, it's not a criminal offence for industrial manslaughter. It is not a criminal offence in this country, industrial manslaughter. Whilst there are people in this country, employers who knowingly ignore health and safety laws, knowingly ignore health and safety laws, lead to the death of a worker, that is not a criminal offence. So let's be very careful with the language that we use in this place. It is not a criminal offence. It is not a criminal offence in this country for a union official to enter a workplace. Yet the government likes to pretend. If you want to talk about scare campaigns, the government likes to pretend. And they beat up on the union and they beat up on the workers in that industry, and now they're beating up on the employers in this industry who have sat down and bargained in good faith an agreement that talks about Australian jobs. You think that the government would welcome this? We're trying to correct a mistake that they've made. If they want to stand up and be true to their rhetoric, stand up for Australian jobs, they would support this disallowance motion. We do have a problem with temporary work visas in the construction industry. We do have a problem. Students working in the construction industry, international students, backpackers working in the construction industry. There's been a misuse of 457 visas in the construction industry, and this government's own report by the Fair Work Ombudsman has told us that and exposed that 1 in 5 people here working on a 457 visa has found to be underpaid or not employed and in the job in which they were engaged in the first place. Like, this is on this government's watch. This is on this government's watch. And you would think that they would join with Labor and disallow these things that are in the code that basically will make it harder for workers and employers to restrict the use of labour hire of temporary workers here in this country. And backpackers in the construction industry, when you talk to a labourer or a construction worker, they are baffled by how we let backpackers work in the construction industry. How can they have the skills? How can they have the Australian standards to work in a construction industry? And we know the tragic consequences of it. In Perth, last year, there was a tragic death of a woman who was here as a backpacker. She fell down a lift shaft and was killed. In the very same town in Perth, a year before, we also lost 2 Irish backpackers here in this country, supposed to be on a trip of a lifetime, working on a construction site, that were killed. And it is not fair that we allow them to work in these workplaces. That is why we've seen employers and employees sit down with the union and negotiate agreements to say, we take responsibility for who works in our workplace. We will ensure that it's locals for local jobs first. Apprentices, Deputy Speaker, why would a government not want to support Australian kids getting an apprenticeship? It's as simple as that. Why would a government allow there to be disallow in collective agreements apprenticeship ratios? Employers and employees that are saying, we take responsibility for the next generation of tradespeople and we will mandate ratios of how many young people we will have on a site. That is an employer saying, we acknowledge there is a cost, an extra cost to investing in the next generation, but we will do it. Companies that will stand with the CFMEU, that will stand with the workers and say, we together will invest in the next generation. Why would a government want to stop that? Why would a government, when we have a youth unemployment crisis in this country, when we have a loss of apprentices because we are seeing a downturn in the manufacturing industry, why would a government not support Australian kids getting apprentices in our construction industry? This government is so out of touch with what is happening in Australian workplaces, and it is out of touch with what is happening in the construction industry. They should support Labor's proposal to disallow these parts of the code so we can put Australian jobs and we can put Australians first. We can put our young people first and make sure that they get an apprenticeship so they too can have a career in construction. We should put local unemployed tradespeople first so that they can get work when there is, because we have a downturn in our economy. We should encourage and support and champion businesses who sit down with unions and negotiate these kinds of clauses in their agreement. They are showing the leadership that this government is failing. Instead of championing that, this government instead says we want to make it illegal for you to do that. They are putting a handbrake on our ability to employ locals, and they're putting a handbrake on the ability to train the next generation. This government needs to support this if they are genuine about jobs. They need to support this if they are genuine about construction jobs. They also need to support this to save themselves.
I thank the member for Bendigo.